Welcome to the SaaS Revolution Show, a podcast by SaaStock. Here we interview SaaS founders from around the world who've been there and done that, as they share the ins and outs of how they built their businesses, their operations, their path to securing investment, and more. Our mission with the podcast is to help you, the founder, learn how to scale your SaaS, maintain your well-being, and navigate the complexities of this ever-changing industry. I'm your host, Alex Theuma, and together we'll explore the good, the bad, and the ugly in the journey to SaaS success. Welcome back to the SaaS Revolution Show. I am your host, Alex Theuma, CEO, founder of SaaStock, also general partner at Back Future Ventures. Delighted to be joined today by Mike Walrath, who's the chairman and CEO of Yext and was also the founder of Right Media. Mike, how are you doing?
Alex, thanks for having me. Great to see you.
Yeah, good to have you on the podcast. I see a big fish behind you. Does this give any indication of that you might be by the coast?
I do happen to be by the coast. That is a very big rendering of what is typically a pretty small fish. That's a black sea bass, which is local to our waters here in Montauk, and a really big one is maybe 3 or 4 pounds. So it looks a lot bigger there.
I mean, edible? No, the fish.
Oh yeah, delicious. Yeah.
Very good. So you're getting the appetite for me to have fish for dinner tonight, Mike, but also the appetite to jump into the podcast to learn more about you, talk about some very topical AI-related content as well. So Mike, we always start getting to know the guest a little bit more. To many of the audience here, perhaps coming across you for the first time. So would love to know, who is Mike Walrath?
That was a small one to start with. So I've been around this. I've been around the software industry since 2003. It was not necessarily the plan. I went to University of Richmond. I got an bachelor's in English, mainly because I could go to classes where I didn't have to do any math or take any tests, and could fill pages with words, and that was sort of the best way for me to get through the college experience. Left there, got into sales, and wound up, found myself in the late 90s working for DoubleClick selling advertising. And that kind of launched a journey that everyone, including myself, was pretty unexpected. Started Right Media in 2003, which I'm not sure we even knew to call it SaaS at that point. We're building a digital exchange platform that buyers and sellers of advertising license from us and used to trade media, and it just kind of, right time, right place, took off. Sold that company to Yahoo in 2007, ran the global search business there, the global advertising marketplaces business that included the search marketplace there, and left there in 2009, helped start Yext, or helped, really pivot Yext into what it is today. Invested in a lot of business, did some crazy, completely outside of the software industry things. And then again, pretty unexpectedly found myself back in the CEO seat at Yext about just over 3 years ago.
How comes that came about, as you said, so unexpectedly?
Yeah.
Given that point in life, like why take on this opportunity?
Yeah, it was Yext has been a really interesting journey. So Howard Lerman, Brian Distelberger really, founded the business along with the third founder who wound up leaving the business pretty early. So they started the business in 2006. By 2008, it was clear that the original business that they had started was a good business, but it wasn't going to scale, and it wasn't a software business. It was a marketing services business. And so I invested in the company in 2008. In 2009, we did sort of a hard pivot to software around listings management, which was really being driven by the fragmentation of the digital experience based on the mobile smartphone. Which I guess is a redundancy. It's just a smartphone. Anyway, so we launched this business then. I became the chairman of the company. We had a huge growth curve from 2010 until the IPO in 2017. And then it got really, really interesting. So the business was geared around helping local marketers be discoverable. And a couple things happened there as we got into sort of the 2020 timeframe. You had sort of the perfect storm of 3 different things going on. The first was Google was just consuming all of the market. And so it candidly just got easier to manage, at least seemed easier to manage your digital presence and your digital visibility. So that made our product a little harder to sell. Then we had COVID, which when you're selling a product that's really geared towards local marketers who are trying to drive feet into doors, that caused, sort of another hurdle for us. And then the third thing that happened was the ZERP environment, and we had a lot of small upstart competitors with a lot of funding. And so we kind of went through, I'd say from 2019 to late 2019 until, very recently, kind of went through this very difficult period where the growth got really hard to come by. We were being beset by these kind of commoditizing competitors on all sides who had a lot of money to spend. And so it all kind of, at the end of 21, as the market started to get soft, that sort of all came to a head. I think it became clear that the business needed a pretty hard reset. Howard was ready to go back into his sort of entrepreneuring 0 to 1 phase, which he's done brilliantly, and has a startup that is doing really well called Rome. And so, we sort of looked at each other, and it was clear that someone had to kind of steer the ship for a while, and that, there weren't too many other people to look at. And so I sort of somewhat reluctantly took that job and took that on in March of 2022 officially. And I have to say it was far harder than I thought it was going to be. Being a low growth, declining growth SaaS business in 22 and 23 in the public markets is just, it's been a very humbling experience. And there were many times where we wondered why we didn't take the company private and sort of get behind a black screen and do this. I think in the last 12 months, what we've seen is that the hard work that we've done over the last few years is starting to pay off. And we've got a lot of runway ahead of us with the kind of what I would call the refragmentation of the brand visibility environment.
With that, I mean, just kind of rewinding to sort of Right Media and I guess the significant exit there, and sort of down the path of like making a number of investments, starting businesses and so on, and then this opportunity coming up. I guess for you from like the personal decision, at that point in your life, in terms of not needing to do it, but like the perhaps the challenge and the opportunity. Just kind of like want to get some insights as to like the mindset of I don't really need to do this, but why would somebody do this, at this point in time?
Yeah, I think a lot of things we do in hindsight, if you knew everything you knew, like, starting the Right Media story was from the outside looked, like a sort of rocket ship and, exactly what you would expect to be really fun. And it was really fun in a lot of ways. But when you look at sort of if you knew how hard it was going to be, even with something that was kind of wildly successful like that going into it, if someone sat you down and basically allowed you to, this condensed experience in a few hours of what it was going to feel like, the roller coaster ride of that, I don't know that I would have, done it. And I think that's true with a lot of founders, is like, you have to have this ability to suspend disbelief that it's not going to be that hard. And, that's what that decision in 2022, late 2021, to kind of go back into the arena, and it was really based on a number of underestimations of how hard it was going to be. It was also March 9th of 22, which was my first official day on the job as the CEO, was I think just 3 or 4 days before the first interest rate hike. And so we were kind of sitting there in March thinking like, okay, there are all these things that we believe can be true. The first is that the default revenue multiple for SaaS is like 10x. And so if we're sitting here at, 1.5x, then like it's going to be easy to get back to, where we were. The interest rate environment, the recessionary environment, like that all changed. And those assumptions, have proven to be totally, sort of not very good assumptions. But again, I go back to, most things in life that we do that are hard, the blessing is that we don't know how hard they're going to be when we start them, and then we're stubborn, and so we attack them. We work through the pain.
Yeah, a lot of things there, and obviously, probably since 2020, the world, the macroeconomic state is it's throwing up one thing after the other at us, and so very difficult to predict the future. And when you start to think that there are signs that this year, like things are coming back and it's getting better.
Yeah.
Lots of things kind of like kick off, right?
Right. Yeah.
And threats of World War III, et cetera, et cetera. So definitely, running a business, over the last 4 or 5 years has certainly been very challenging to navigate navigate that. We certainly feel that ourselves.
Well, I think I'm sorry, but it's part of the problem in SaaS in particular is like we went from sort of not even really existing as an industry to one of the great all-time 15-year bull runs, right? Like there weren't a lot of hard times during those first 15 years. Growth was easy to come by. The digital transformation was driving everything. And we just got really, kind of, I think, used to an environment where like, if you weren't growing, 30, 40%, you were just failing, right? Now, if you look at the public market, there's maybe one company who's growing over 30%. 4 years ago, it was every company was growing over 30%. And so, we weren't trained, in a lot of ways. I was lucky because I came up in the early 2000s during the, sort of the internet, bubble recession. And so I had this pattern recognition around like these things last longer than we think and the corrections are harder than we think. And so I think in a lot of ways that was an advantage for getting through the last few years to know that, even though, we really want it to get better in the selling environment for software, that it doesn't get better as fast as we think. And it doesn't really get better until there's a big, impetus for corporate America, big, small, from the SMB up to the largest enterprise, to deploy lots of capital into software-like solutions. And I'm optimistic that we're starting to see that unlock. But we were optimistic a year ago and 2 years ago also. We tend to get optimistic as we go into the second half of the year because we've had 15 years of pattern recognition around this is when the big buying happens. So we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, I mean, probably just a good segue then from that, like maybe a two-part question here, just like touching on the state of SaaS now and maybe some of the disruption or evolution impact of AI into that. And then perhaps the second part to that is like maybe with Yext as, let's say, a software SaaS native company and how it's thinking about AI, what you're doing around that would be good to understand.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that a bit. I think it's really, something that the market and management teams are trying to figure out. So it's been an interesting. Yext was very early to AI. We were talking about AI around our search solutions as early as 2019, 2020. I think we're way too early in a lot of those conversations with customers. And at the expense of our core business, which I've already covered. I think we've seen this sort of initially we saw this big bump in 2023 when, language models were taking off and we're starting to, see some benefit. And the first thing we saw lots of SaaS companies rebounding, in the middle of 23 because it was okay, AI is going to drive huge productivity and huge uptake in these products. And then, the bookings didn't follow, right? And then the narrative became, well, AI is going to kill SaaS, right? We're going to be vibe coding CRMs and you're not going to need Salesforce anymore, right? And there was a whole news cycle around that really, I think, took a lot of the sort of market. Again, I tend to use the public markets as a comp just for like how the market's thinking about SaaS. So what we've seen is this really significant multiple compression around SaaS over the last, call it 6 quarters or so. And I'm not sure either one of those. I think it's quite clear that the first narrative didn't take place. I think this notion that AI is going to kill SaaS is a bad take, but I think it's going to fundamentally change it. And I think it's going to cause us to really examine some of the things that we believe to be true about the way that we do business. So, some examples of that. The first one that I think we really are going to wind up thinking about as an industry is historically, and we've had this kind of 15, 20 years of history where the market has told us that the more pure SaaS you are, the more valuable you are, right? And so we as SaaS companies have run away from this notion of there should be a services economy around we love the idea of a services economy around our business, but we want it to be outside of our business. So if when you read the SaaS playbook, if you will, over the last 15 years, you hope that you can catch this magic where IT services companies build a practice around selling and deploying your software. Right. And that's just taken as like sort of gospel dogma as like, that's how you create value. And the reason why is because those services are really expensive to deliver and low margin. And so, we wind up coming up with these sort of rules and takes that say, if more than 10% of your revenue is coming from services, then you're not a good software business, right? And it's really interesting because if you look at like who has suffered or who's been maligned by that take, it's companies like ServiceNow and Palantir, right? They happen to be two of the most valuable, highly valued, high multiple software companies, software services companies out there today. This, I think, is a sort of fundamental shift we're going to have to deal with, which is it's far more likely that AI changes the economics and the dynamics of the IT services market than the SaaS market. But SaaS companies will have to adjust to that. And the first thing that I think goes out the window here is this notion that to be a great SaaS company, you can't be deploying services. I think in the new world, you have to deploy services. It's going to be a more profitable business because you can bring AI to the table and you can automate a lot more of the services work. But if you're not coming to the customer with a complete solution to their problem, then I think you're going to have a really hard time.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and I agree to the best of my knowledge, right? And I think the ever more sort of increasing use of AI, what also people are craving, on the back of that, and people are loving automation and the velocity and the power it brings, is more human interaction. And this can be the differentiation between, choosing one partner over the other.
Yeah.
I've had I haven't had lots of experience given the size of SaaStock as a team of enterprise software, buying and implementation. But in some of my recent experience, the service layer that I've had around it, which has been delivered by the SaaS company, in this case, it's Persona Tech, has been absolutely fantastic, right? And in terms of weekly calls, Slack channels where we're conversing, really to enable us to be set up for success, so that we're successful, we make money, they make money. And that's fantastic. But then obviously there are a lot of the AI native companies that certainly they're in their early stage, which are, I don't know about faceless, but you don't have that kind of human interaction. And perhaps at the point in time where they're at, they don't require that. But that human interaction and service is very much becoming ever increasingly important, right?
Yeah, and I think the more up market you go, right, the more you're going to have to answer this question about, is it going to be the way it's always been, right? So am I going to, if my customer wants to deal with the fact that the Google monopoly is quickly falling apart when it comes to where consumers ask questions, right? What dynamic does that create? That creates a dynamic that I now have to understand my brand visibility across a far greater number of platforms, right? That's a huge complexifier. It creates massive complexity for the CMO in particular, because they're expected to, at its core, success for a marketer is like, okay, my product, my service, my location, my coffee shop, my pizza place, my doctor, whatever it is, are the answer to the question that the consumer is asking. For the better part of the last 20 years, the only thing you really had to worry about was, what is Google saying about my brand? Where do I show up in the SERP results? Can I buy my way to the top of that page? That is shifting faster than we've probably seen anything shift in this space before. Google will put up a fight here, no doubt about it. They have a huge innovator's dilemma. They have $200 billion of paid search that is much harder to deliver across the Gemini AI experience. And they're going to have to figure out how much of that paid search market they're willing to give up to keep up with the kind of magical consumer experience that companies like Perplexity and OpenAI are delivering with far less monetization. That's a sort of a game of kings that's going to play out. But from the point of view of the marketer, they have to understand in this case, what's the job to be done? And the job to be done here is to build a strategy where you can make sure that you're doing whatever you have to do to influence the answer that's going to be given by ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, and on and on. And there's going to be, Grok. What are they all saying about my business? That's a job to be done for the marketer, and it's a really important job. And candidly, these things are all black boxes today, except for Google. So there's a lot of uncertainty around that. The answer to that can't just be pure software. It has to be a combination of software and intelligence, software and services. And the question that we and everyone else has to grapple with is, how are we going to do this? Are we going to do this by delivering a software platform and then relying on the external market to provide the sort of services around creating content, around distributing that content, or does that become more of a bundled offering? And I think if I have to predict the future, I think what we're going to see is more bundling. I think we're going to see that the $500 billion SaaS industry is going to get a lot harder to differentiate from the, call it $1.6 trillion IT services, annual spend. And that's both, I think scary and exciting depending on your lens.
Again, like a few things there perhaps to sort of unpack, but the highlight, there's real commonality between what is SaaS, what is AI. Obviously, it's sitting at the application layer, it's software. Do you foresee that 10 years time, we still have a SaaS industry that is growing, bigger than $500 billion? Is it going to be, renamed, repositioned, sort of AI? What are your thoughts around that? Is AI a separate, industry at the application layer? Again, it's software, very similar businesses. It's just a slightly, advancement on the technology.
I think no one knows. I think we can, sort of, because I'm, old enough to have been around for a couple of these shifts, right? We had the internet in, late 90s. We had, before that, but that's really when it took off. And then this mobile shift that we saw in, 15 years later, early, kind of 2008, 2009. One of the things that happened, I think, was we started defining categories based on the sort of the disruption. Right. So in the late 90s, it was all about these are internet companies and these are not internet companies. Right. Today, we don't talk about that at all. We don't say Amazon's an internet company and Walmart's not an internet company. Right. Like what we talk about is that, they're businesses. Right. And now they all leverage this, the internet. Right. Which, mobile, we don't really talk about that's a mobile company. That's not a mobile. We won't talk in 10 years about this is an AI company or that's not an AI company. I think that's a moment in time, and it's totally normal for us to be over-indexed to, are you an AI company or are you not an AI company? I think what will be the important thing in AI is the intelligence, right? And so the transformation that we're seeing now is that we can build far more intelligence into the products. And what that does is that takes away the need to apply, thousands of human being hours to a lot of these jobs to be done. That I think causes what we've traditionally defined as the SaaS industry and the IT services industry, which together, it really depends on how you measure them. It's somewhere between $2 to $4 trillion a year. If you include networking and lots of other things. I think probably the more conservative way to estimate those two is to just take the IT services piece and the software piece, and you put them together and you're over $2 trillion a year. That, I think, how those $2 trillion plus get spent every year and how they incorporate the intelligence piece is going to be the thing that we're talking about in 5 or 10 year. Because AI, you won't say AI anymore. You just talk about these are intelligent systems, and more, we'll be able to deliver the intelligence of the system without as many human being hours, and that's the huge productivity gain that we can expect.
And then sort of jumping back, you spoke a little bit about the impact of AI and how on SEO and SEM, and everybody certainly getting better, more and more sort of using all the GPTs to search for their answers. And you said it's a black box, marketers need to figure out the strategy. What are some of the things that you're seeing, whether it's Yext is doing itself or some of the companies that you're working with to influence, ChatGPT to get your company ranked?
Yeah, so this is sort of bullseye for where Yext has historically sat. The approach that we've always taken, and for, like I said, for the last 5 or 6 years, this has really been about how do you influence that Google search results page. Has always been, it's been a citation approach. It's been a content approach. You distribute your data accordingly. We have a really robust data system that sits at the, underneath all of the different products that we offer. And that allows you to distribute listings information, to manage your reputation, to distribute social media campaigns, all of which is kind of, in the service of driving organic visibility on Google. We don't today play in the paid search space. I think the most fundamental shift that we're going to see here is that large language model based AI assistants are going to have context and memory that the traditional search engines have not had. And that becomes really, really important to marketers, because the more that my AI knows about me, the more important it is, the deeper it's going to delve when it looks to give me the answer to the question, right? So I'm going to train my AI either through just interaction with it or very specifically, I can tell it, I have a child with a nut allergy. I don't ever want you to recommend a restaurant to me that isn't nut allergy friendly, right? I don't like to eat seed oils, right? Whatever, I can say anything, right? I'm a vegan or whatever it is. And it'll remember that. So no matter what I ask it, like I can just be, hey, I'm hungry, I'd like some tacos, right? It's going to take all that into account. That creates a huge challenge and opportunity for marketers, because what they're going to have to figure out is that every query, every prompt becomes bespoke. And so you can't play this game anymore where like just, well, I'm going to buy as much, of the first position of tacos near me as I can, right? Because tacos near me isn't tacos near me. It's, for me, it's tacos near me that doesn't have seed oils, that uses tallow, that doesn't, that it's not allergy free and whatever it is. Where should I stay on my vacation in the south of France? For me individually, because of the context and the memory of the AI, becomes I want a place that's pet friendly and has activities for children or whatever. And your version of where should I stay on my vacation in the south of France might be very different, right? Marketers have to, that's a long preamble for why this change is going to be so profound. And what marketers have to understand is that the way these systems are going to answer those questions is going to be, what data are you making available to me through all the different ways that I may access that data, so that I can give the best recommendation, give the best answer to the question. And we're just frankly not ready for it, because we've focused so much for 20 years on how do I influence that Google search results page. Now there are going to be, even if there's only 5 or 6 additional platforms, it's a massive lift to figure out what do I need to do to influence each of these black boxes. And they're all going to be a little bit different.
Just jump in just at the end of the show, but a bit of leadership advice for scaling founders. I guess before like some of the quicker fire questions, maybe it's a broad question, but like given your leadership experience, certainly at Yext and also at Right Media, maybe what are the couple of things that you kind of wished you'd known, at the start that you know now that would be, obviously transferable to the audience around leadership?
Yeah, my advice, to particularly startup type, CEOs, entrepreneurs and teams, or even more scaled teams is, I think we get it backwards sometimes, and we over-index to the point of view of investors, right? I think investors have really value, whether they're venture investors, private equity investors, public market investors, they have a really valid point of view on how value gets created. But they tend to be pretty focused on their time frame, right? And how their business works, right? And so in venture, they're hits driven, right? So their advice is going to be geared towards maximum risk, right? And maximum output. That's not always the best advice for founders. Sometimes maximum risk isn't the right answer, but we tend to take it as a given that that's the only way to go. And so the advice that over the 25 years of operating in the software tech space that I give most often is, you have to use your own judgment, and you have to determine, is the advice I'm getting correct for the situation that I'm in? Because there's nothing more damaging to the core value of a business than pursuing aggressive growth when that aggressive growth is not available to you. And we went through this at Yext. We overspent to continue to maintain a growth curve when the market dynamics were not allowing it. And what we became was like highly inefficient. It's taken us years to break out of that pattern. And now I think what we have is we have an environment where we've gotten the company really efficient, and now the tailwinds are going to be there for us. And so, every time we get mismatched to the reality of the situation that we're in, and we run these playbooks that have historically worked, and again, we tend to look at the winners and say, okay, the subset of companies who we pattern match on are the winners. right? We don't pay attention to the ones where like the wrong growth strategy didn't work because you forget about it, because they don't exist. And so we have to get better as CEOs and founders at applying our own judgment to the situation that we're in and not just rotely following whatever the playbook is that's being offered by the investment community.
Yeah, this is great advice. Thanks for sharing that. And moving into the quickish fire round then, what's the best advice you've ever received?
I mean, I can't attribute this to a specific person, and I know quickish isn't my strong suit, but I'll try to be as quick as I can with this. It distills down to think. Like, you think, be critical. Don't assume other people know more than you do, especially when it comes to your own business. I can tell you, with a lot of confidence that I know more than most people do today about the Yext business, and my team certainly knows more about the Yext business than anybody on the outside who might tell us what to do. And my smartest public market investors, they will caveat anything they tell me by saying, look, you know more than I do. I'm just giving you this advice. And so, when we're especially early in our journeys and early in our careers, we tend to over-index to other people's points of view. Just, we need to think more and be more confident in our own opinions.
Yeah, I love that. Hardest thing about being a CEO?
The hardest thing is the disconnect between, sort of results today and what you're trying to build, right? And, keeping, and I think this gets much harder in the public markets. People tend to view the stock price as a daily report card on how your business is doing. But if you look at, stock prices and performance over the course of, a 20-year period, they're almost never correlated between, current performance of the business and the stock price. You can be way behind or way ahead of that curve. I think, Palantir is an amazing company, but like I would not be comfortable today at 90 times revenue, right? I think it's if I were I think Alex Karp is an amazing entrepreneur from what I can see, but I'm just not sure that I would be really comfortable there. So I just think the hardest thing of the job is keeping your team focused on the mission at hand and not all these externalities of like, what was the valuation of the last round and what is our stock price today?
What about, have you got a favorite book on business?
Yes.
And what is that?
I'm going to give you two. So these are the two that I recommend the most often. They're both, one would seem to be out of date, but I think it's one of the most important books any management team member could read. It's called The Outsiders. It's not the novel. It's a nonfiction book that examines the, over 20, 30 year time frames, the best performing CEOs of all time. And Warren Buffett is the top of that list. That wouldn't surprise anyone, but I think people will be surprised by a lot of the other ones. And it's really, it's a book about taking an unconventional approach to how you create value. And I would strongly recommend that. The other book that I always recommend, it's not really a business book, is a book called Deep Survival. And it examines the reason why some people survive in sort of crisis situations and some people don't. It literally like lost in the wild, lost at sea. And the most, without ruining the sort of punchline of the book, the most interesting thing about it is that there's almost no correlation between your training to survive in those situations and your actual survival. But there is a really strong correlation between people who recognize the seriousness of the situation that they're in and how they behave. So the classic example is like the Air Force Ranger, Army Ranger who gets lost in the woods and is so confident that he doesn't realize he's lost in the wilderness and he gets dehydrated and falls off a cliff and breaks his leg. That person dies even though they've been trained their whole life for that situation. And then you have the child who gets lost in the woods and in the same snowstorm in the same environment and basically says, wow, I'm lost and this is a serious situation. Let me crawl inside that log because that seems warmer than staying out here in the snow. And that child is found the next day alive because they understood the situation they were in and the gravity of it. So I just think it's such a good message for founders who need to really understand the environment that they're operating in and be very awake to the reality of it.
Awesome. Well, I took notes there of both. I know we're recording, but just wanted to remind myself freshly before we publish this. So thanks for sharing those, Mike. And so if people want to reach out to you because they listen to the podcast, have any questions, where would be the best place to contact you and also find out more about Yext?
Yeah, Yext.com is our web presence. I don't keep much of a social media footprint. I do have a LinkedIn page. Don't do much external posting. It's just sort of one of my quirks. And then anybody who wants to reach me about business-related things, I'm at Walrath at Yext is the easiest way to get me.
Awesome. Well, Mike, thank you so much for being a great guest on the show today. Really appreciate it. It's been very insightful. Enjoyed the conversation. So thanks so much, Mike Walrath, Chairman and CEO at Yext, for being on the SaaS Revolution Show.
Thanks for having me, Alex. It was great talking.